Hey everyone, welcome again to another episode of Darshan We have our esteemed guest. We have Dr. Kate Merton, MBA, PhD. Kate, am I missing anything else?
No, that's more than enough.
For now. Kate is, well, I'm going to let Kate introduce herself, but what we're going to discuss in a few seconds is the idea of pharmacogenomics and what is the impact going to be on the drug development process.
This is the DarshanTalks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.
Let's be honest, we've all learned that drug development process, literally in pharmacy school, you talk about your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3s, and we talk about sort of almost a templated way of taking your product through approval. Is pharmacogenomics going to change that? That's the topic for today. So Kate, let's start with an introduction. Tell us about yourself.
So, Kate Merton, I am currently the head of commercial for Navigate Biopharma, which is a Novartis subsidiary which develops clinical trial diagnostic tests and does work on companion diagnostics. In a prior life, I worked in the innovation space, running innovation labs with a variety of entrepreneurs. My background is in research, discovering drugs, then running clinical trials to get them through regulatory approval, and also working on the business side of pharma to market the products, and also have a background in AI and blockchain.
So we're going to discuss AI and blockchain with you at a future point. Let's start with where we were. So, Kate, in your experience working with Navigate, working with innovators, looking at where the world is going, do you think that the FDA needs to reconsider its templated format of drug development? And if so, which direction?
I probably would not assume to tell the FDA to change any of their templates.
Oh, I do it all the time. That's fine. No one ever listens to me, but still.
Therein lies the difference between you and me. But I would say that in partnership between the pharma companies that are spending all the money on the R&D and the FDA, who provide them, the appropriate guidelines of how to get stuff through the regulatory process, there are going to be some changes made. I think people are already seeing that. Often from a pharma perspective, they make the changes because it's, number one, in the best interest of the patient. And I'm kind of like proud that pharma are concerned with that. But then also it makes a financial decision not only for them, but some of their other sort of payer partners, that sort of thing. And I think as they begin to see the benefits of that, it will become even more part of the early research process, like right back at the very beginning when you're even thinking about a target and an indication and what that patient population looks like. I think there will be changes seen there, and the FDA will weigh in and back up the decisions that are made.
So talk to me about what that would look like. Are you proposing that one of the things I always say is that the FDA gives you enough news to hang yourself? Using that context, I think what you're suggesting is that the pharma company would go to the FDA and go, this is what we propose. How early should a pharma company consider that? You talk about early on, you're almost talking at the target product profile level, but is that conceivable?
Right. So, it's a bit of a dance, right? So my experience with working with the FDA is that they're incredibly collaborative, and they give you their best estimation of what it's going to take to get something approved at that second, understanding that things will change. And even after you start a massive multi-million-dollar trial, you might be held to a different set of standards in 2 or 3 years, but they're going to try and help you as quickly and as early as they can. Now, if you can move into the earliest stages before those multi-million-dollar trials occur, it is not only in the FDA's interest, right, because they're having influence earlier on in the pipeline of things, but it's actually in the interest of the drug companies. They want to get rid of those high-risk projects as soon as possible. So, back in the day, someone would make a decision about a target because, the science suggested that this could be interesting, and then you found a lead and you worked out what population to work in. Things are different now. You've got so much population evidence and genetics that you could say, okay, this disease is probably caused by this. Therefore, when we're originally going to do the chemistry back in the lab, we automatically need to be starting with this patient population. That wasn't possible, 15, 20 years ago. Now it is. And I would imagine that as the pharma companies are making those really smart decisions, and they have teams helping them make these smart decisions, they're going to say, okay, rather than us making this drug that may or may not work in 45% of our target population, why don't we really drill down to the group that it is going to work in, save our resources, and develop the right drug for the right group right at the very beginning?
I think that sounds really smart, but it also to me sounds like something big pharma would do. I work with emerging companies all the time, and what you're often dealing with is the idea of, I don't have enough money. And while I totally understand and agree with the idea that isn't it better to sort of know who you're working with and get positive results there, I wonder if smaller emerging companies would go, I'm cutting my population in a quarter or getting rid of most of them, and it's going to cost me money. Why would I do that? And what's your response to a company like that?
I would, politely suggest that some smaller companies, are smarter than perhaps you give them credit for, because, small companies or large companies, if they're in it for the right reasons, which is treating a patient and not causing any harm, they are going to want to get the right population. And nowadays, having access to data which shows you which is the right population and which is the genetic abnormality that means you're going to process a different drug quicker, that's not as expensive as it used to be. And even the small companies, if they're backed by like a good VC group that wants to de-risk their opportunity, they might ask them to look at that too. What would be worse is being a small company, not doing that initial piece of work, and then you get to the FDA for your initial discussions and they're like, oh, why didn't you do that? That would be, I don't want to say stupid, but that would probably be a little bit short-sighted. So I would suggest that even though it seems like a risk and a cost to the smaller companies, if you look at the way that things are currently moving, and they're moving pretty rapidly about getting pharmacogenomic data to back up your claims, even as a small company, I'd seriously start thinking about it.
So then it raises the question of how do you actually do it? So would you suggest that it become part of a screening process, or would you say that you actually do a full-blown study based on which you start sort of evaluating efficacy based on different populations?
So let's pick up on what you said at the end, based upon different populations. So it's going to be based upon populations. It's also going to be based upon the disease area you're in. You're going to find some disease areas, oncology, cardiovascular, diabetes, like things that there has been a lot of money spent on. You're probably going to find existing evidence to point you in the right direction. And I would say that the level of effort you put on looking into the genomics of something right at the beginning should be dependent upon the level of evidence that already exists. You're gonna balance it. Maybe you're going to take the risk of going alone and not looking into it if it's a completely new area and no one else has done it. But if someone else has done it, in the areas of cardiovascular.
Hold on, what's the it here? Just to clarify, no one else has done it.
If nobody has already spent a lot of time and money looking into the genomics of a certain disease, then you might want to go without it. But certain disease areas, it's completely nailed. People know what they're doing, and you should absolutely be, your effort in that area should be proportionate to the amount of research that's already gone into that area.
Which really brings the question of transparency of trial data and data received. I'm going to give you a 30-second bit of airtime to tell me what your take is on that. Should that data be available for everyone to use? 30 seconds, Kate.
So, it's my favorite topic. So patient data ownership. Patients should absolutely be in control of their own data. If they actually provide that information, even though they've signed off on a consent form in a clinical trial, I believe that they should have access to it. It should be provided back to them after the clinical trial. I think by empowering the patient and appropriately educating them, only advancements can be made. I think absolutely everyone should have their own data and they should be able to use it the way they see fit.
That was pretty good. We don't necessarily agree on all bits of that, but I can totally see your version of it. So thank you again, everyone. This was excellent as always, Kate. Stay tuned. We're going to have her talk a little bit more about a bunch of more things. Stay tuned, everyone.
This is the DarshanTalks podcast. Regulatory Guy, Irregular Podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at DarshanTalks or the show's website at DarshanTalks.com.